Darkness did not fall upon him like a shroud. Instead, it burned at the back of his throat, a heavy, metallic taste. Troseus opened his eyes. Or perhaps he only imagined he did. For in the pitch black, the difference between eyes wide open and eyes shut tight was merely a trick the mind played on itself. The air filling his lungs carried not the scent of dust that had settled for centuries, nor the damp rot of a grave, but a sharper, more caustic chemical tang. He wanted to cough, but his throat was parched parchment, and his chest ached as if it might tear apart. No sound came. The surface beneath his back was not the familiar cold of rough stone. It was smooth, disturbingly flat, and unnaturally cold. "You still breathe," he murmured to himself. His voice was as frail as the rustling of a dried leaf. Why? His memory was a fog-swept swamp. Images were blurred, sounds muffled. Yet one sensation was crystal clear. The cold. That damned cold seeping into his very marrow. And faces. 7 faces. He squeezed his eyes shut. A throbbing pain assaulted his temples, as if the inside of his skull had been hollowed out and filled with molten lead. His councilors. Those he had shared his table with. Those he called mentors. The 7 pillars of his kingdom. Geralt, Vianne, Oris. They were the ones who had cast him down into this abyss. The aches in his body were not merely born of exhaustion. It felt as though a strange, restless fire was prowling beneath his skin, deep within his muscles. He felt sick, poisoned. "My people," he groaned. The ones he was sworn to protect. Those 7 traitors, how were they carving up his lands now? Perhaps they were all dead. He tried to sit up slowly. The metal rings around his wrists bit into his flesh. They were thick and heavy, anchored not to a wall, but to the strange table upon which he lay. His arms trembled. These limbs, once strong enough to cleave armor with a sword, were now skin and bone. Whether from starvation and thirst or that unnatural slumber, he felt like a ruin of a man. But then came the rage, rising from his gut, clawing its way up his throat like scalding bile, a pure, unadulterated fury mixed with shame. He pressed his hands against the smooth surface. He commanded his wasted muscles. "Rise." The body resisted. Joints cracked in protest. "Rise, Troseus! You are a king!" He gritted his teeth. He clenched them so hard he tasted copper in his mouth. Inside him, an energy he could not comprehend rippled. A fleeting, solitary second of delirious, explosive power. He hauled against his bonds. With an angle that should have snapped his bones, he pulled with everything he had. A high-pitched screech rose from the joints of the metal rings. Just as Troseus was about to scream from the agony, snap! The metal shattered. Thrown off balance by the sudden release, Troseus crashed to the floor. The impact with the hard ground knocked the wind out of him. His hands were free, though his wrists were raw and bloody. Gasping for air, trembling, he stared at his hands in the dark. He couldn't understand how he had broken such thick iron. It must have been rusted. Yes, surely it was rusted through. Otherwise, in this state, he couldn't have bent a spoon. He tried to stand, his knees shaking violently. Clutching the wall, he forced himself upright. Vertigo spun the world around him. 7 pieces, he snarled, his voice a raspy whisper. His throat burned. You will all pay. The fallen king took his first staggering step. But the echo of his footfall had not yet died away when another voice, shrill and unexpectedly cheerful, cut through the darkness. "Hey, you!" Troseus froze, nearly toppling over. His hand instinctively went to his waist, reaching for a sword that was no longer there, his fingers grasping only empty air. He narrowed his eyes, scanning the gloom. His vision blurred. "So, you're finally awake?" The voice came from behind a cluster of metallic pipes to his left. For a long time there was only groaning, painful, boring groans. But now I hear a human breath. I even smell a hint of rage, eh? Troseus leaned against the wall, struggling to stay on his feet, but he forced his voice to be hard. "Who are you? Don't hide in the shadows like a rat." From between the metal pipes, two large, bulging eyes appeared first. Then a body emerged, small as a child's, but wrinkled as an elder's. His skin was the color of earth, his ears pointed like leaves. "A rat? Oh, have a heart!" The creature giggled, the sound like rusty tin. "I am Xcina, an Earth Gnome. Pleased to meet you. Or not yet, depending on how things go." Troseus frowned. Was this a hallucination? Was his mind unraveling from hunger? "What is your business here, creature? Are you a spy for those traitors?" Xcina sighed theatrically and perched atop a metal crate. "Why am I here? Don't ask, it's a long story, but I think I frustrated the gods a little. Let's just say I threw a wrench in their grand plans. Moved the wrong stone at the wrong time and, whoops, found myself in this metal box." Troseus snorted. He clutched his head. The pain was unbearable. He had no strength to deal with this chatty creature. All he wanted was to get out of here and wrap his hands around the throats of those 7 traitors. "Leave me be," he growled. "Leave?" Xcina's voice turned mocking. "I don't think you know the way out of here, big man. You can barely stand. Besides," the tone shifted. The shrill cheerfulness vanished, replaced by a sly, sticky curiosity. "I know you." Troseus stopped. He looked back over his shoulder at the small shadow. Xcina narrowed his glowing eyes in the dark, studying him. "Prophecies drift about you. They said he would return, not to unite what was sundered into 7, but to burn it to ash." The creature hopped off the metal crate and stood a few paces behind Troseus. "You are the fallen king, aren't you? Troseus." The name hung in the cold air of the dungeon. Troseus felt a strange chill at hearing his own name from another. It was as if the name belonged to someone else, someone powerful, not this wretched husk. "Be careful when you speak my name, gnome," Troseus said, amidst a fit of coughing. He turned to face him, using the wall for support. "Or I will tear out your tongue." Instead of cowering, Xcina chuckled. The king's threat in this exhausted state seemed to amuse him. "Ooh, tough. I like that. So it really is you. Look at you. Skin and bone, yet still barking orders. You really are as arrogant as the legends say." Troseus narrowed his eyes. The creature's insolence was strange. "The outside isn't like you remember, my king," Xcina continued. "Much has changed. Those 7 traitors, they aren't just traitors anymore. They are now gods." Gods. The word echoed in Troseus's mind, but he suppressed his rage to focus on a more immediate question. "How do you know all this?" he asked suspiciously. His voice cracked against the cold dungeon walls. "How would a gnome trapped in here know of gods outside?" Xcina shrugged, an innocent smile playing on his lips. "Walls have tongues, my king. Gossip travels faster than rats in these dark holes. The whispers of guards, sounds carrying through pipes. If you are a good listener, the world comes to your feet." Troseus looked into the creature's eyes. Even if he was lying, he was too tired to discern it. "How long have you been here?" Xcina tilted his head slightly to the side, his eyes drifting away for a moment. "We arrived around the same time, I think. It was 17 winters ago, or 17 eternities. Who's counting?" 17 winters. Troseus felt his knees give way, but he caught himself. 17 years? A lifetime. A stolen lifetime. "But we need to get out of here now, don't we?" said Xcina, clapping his hands as if to dispel the heavy atmosphere. His eyes gleamed. "Come." "A plan?" Troseus snarled, his eyes fixed on the thick iron bars before them. "These bars, they aren't rotted like the ones on my wrists. I cannot break these." Xcina stepped up to the grate and tapped the metal with a tiny, bony finger. The sound was dull and solid. "You're right, big man. This is a star steel alloy. Even your brute strength couldn't snap these like toothpicks. Not yet, at least." The gnome tried to squeeze through the bars, but his head got stuck. With a grunt and his ears flattened back, he pulled himself free. "Damn it, I've put on weight. Or the bars have shrunk. Definitely the latter." Troseus leaned against the wall, his chest heaving. "Then we are finished. There is no way out." "Don't give up so soon," Xcina said, rummaging through a filthy leather pouch at his belt. He wore the unhappy expression of a merchant forced to part with his treasure. "I didn't want to use this. I really didn't. It's very rare, you know. Takes centuries to gather." In his palm lay a small pile of gray-green dust that looked ordinary enough, but upon closer inspection seemed to vibrate of its own accord. "What is it?" "Ernie," Xcina whispered, as if afraid the dust might hear him. "The essence of elements. If you whisper the right words, you can convince metal it is earth, or water it is fire. But I only have a handful, and we're going to waste it on this accursed door?" As the gnome sprinkled the dust over the lock and hinges, Troseus felt the caustic chemical smell in the air intensify. Xcina muttered something in an unintelligible, guttural tongue. The result was both fascinating and repulsive. The hard, cold steel changed color, as if suddenly stricken by disease. The gray metal turned rust red in seconds, then to a moldy green. Fumes rose from the metal like rotting meat. "Blow," Xcina said, stepping back. Troseus leaned in and blew gently. The sturdy lock, built to last centuries, scattered into the air like cigarette ash. The iron door was no longer a door. It was merely a pile of dust. "Come on," Xcina said, hopping through the gap where the metal had been. "Let's move before the effect wears off. The smell of Ernie tends to attract unpleasant guests." Once out of the cell, Troseus realized this was no ordinary dungeon. It was a slaughterhouse, not for meat, but for souls. The corridors were not made of stone, but of that same smooth, cold metal. Inside glass tubes suspended from the ceiling, indefinable green and yellow fluids bubbled. A rhythmic, mechanical hum pervaded everything, sounding like the breathing of a colossal beast. The walls were lined with counters, filled not with torture devices, but with things resembling surgical instruments, hooks and blades gleaming under the harsh light. Troseus's stomach churned. 17 years. Had he lain on these tables for 17 years? "We must go up," Xcina said, pointing to a spiral staircase at the end of the hall. "We are on the bottom level, where the experiments, the failures, are discarded." Just as they turned toward the stairs, a heavy door slammed open with a deafening crash. The thing that entered was human, yet unlike any human Troseus remembered. He stood over 2 meters tall, his face entirely obscured by a stitched leather mask, metal plates sewn directly into parts of his flesh. He carried no weapon, he had only massive, calloused fists. The guard didn't even pause when he saw them. He simply growled and charged like a bull. Troseus had nowhere to run. His body was exhausted. His mind screamed, "Run!" but his legs refused to obey. As the guard's massive fist descended toward his face, Troseus raised his hand merely as a reflex. Time did not stop, but Troseus's perception suffered a strange fracture. He saw the tension in the guard's muscles, the drift of dust motes in the air. Fear was suddenly replaced by a cold, metallic impulse. Strike. Troseus caught the guard's wrist in midair. The sound was not like the snapping of a dry twig, but like the crack of a cannon. The guard's arm was pulverized within Troseus's weak, scrawny fingers. Before the guard could even bellow in pain, Troseus drove his other hand, moving as if of its own volition, into the guard's chest. It was not a punch. It was a sledgehammer. The guard's rib cage collapsed inward like wet paper. The giant man flew to the end of the corridor, slammed into the metal wall, and stuck there. A dent in the shape of a body remained on the metal surface. Troseus stared at his trembling hands, at his raw, bleeding knuckles. This power did not belong to him. This power belonged to a monster. "Wow!" Xcina's voice came out as a whistle. "If you're like this before breakfast, I can't imagine you on a full stomach." Troseus couldn't answer. The thing inside him purred like a satisfied cat. They climbed the stairs. On the second floor, the atmosphere was even more tense. It was brighter here, and shadows moved behind glass partitions. Troseus spotted a small, rusty scalpel on a counter. Instinctively, he grabbed it. The tiny piece of metal disappearing in his palm felt safer than a massive sword. This time, 2 figures appeared. They looked faster, more agile than the first. They wielded short swords and wore light armor. "Halt!" shouted the one in front. Troseus did not halt, and in that moment he met the second face of his power: speed. As the men moved to raise their swords, Troseus had already closed the distance. The world shifted into slow motion. Troseus watched the formation of fear in the man's pupils, frame by frame. He heard the friction of the blade leaving its scabbard as a melody. The small scalpel in his hand traced an invisible arc in the air. Snick, snick. When Troseus came to a stop behind the men, a single drop of blood slid from the scalpel. The 2 guards froze, not yet realizing what had happened. Then, simultaneously, a thin red line appeared on their throats, and they collapsed. Troseus gasped for air, not because he had moved fast, but from the terrible pleasure that speed had given him. His heart beat as if it would punch through his chest. "You're fast," Xcina said, stepping over the bodies. There was a mix of admiration and fear in his eyes. Too fast. When they reached the top floor, Troseus took a sword from one of the fallen guards. As the hilt settled into his hand, he expected a familiar feeling. But the sword felt wrong, too light, like a toy. "The exit is there," Xcina said, pointing to a massive double door. It bore the motif of a 7-headed dragon, but the space before the door was not empty. There stood the master of the laboratory, a monstrosity towering over 3 meters, his body swollen with purple veins. He had no face, only a single eye buried beneath skin and a rusted metal mouthpiece that allowed him to breathe. In his hand, he held a massive cleaver still dripping with fresh blood. Molok, the jailer. "Escaped," Molok said. His voice sounded like a man walking on broken glass. "Subject 77. Return." Troseus gripped the sword tight. The fear inside him had vanished completely, replaced by an icy focus. This creature, this abomination created by those traitors, it had to be destroyed. When Molok swung the cleaver, the air split. Troseus sidestepped with superhuman reflexes, but the mere wind of the blade cut his cheek. The stone floor shattered under the cleaver's impact. Troseus lunged with his sword. He expected the steel to bury itself in the beast's flesh, but Molok's skin was as hard as armor. The sword bounced off. With a backhand swing, the creature struck Troseus in the chest. Troseus was thrown back, crashing into a metal tank. The tank exploded, spilling acidic liquid across the floor. He should have felt pain, but all he felt was rage. He stood up, his eyes illuminated with that golden glow. The power inside him was no longer whispering, it was roaring. "Show your might." Troseus gripped the sword with both hands. This time, he poured not just his muscles, but that liquid lightning flowing in his veins into the weapon. The steel of the sword grew hot, taking on an orange aura, humming with a lethal frequency. Molok attacked again. This time, Troseus did not run. As the beast's cleaver descended, Troseus lunged forward. Like a king, like an executioner's decree. Sword and cleaver collided in midair, but there was no sound of metal on metal. There was the sound of an explosion. Troseus's sword sheared through the monster's massive cleaver like a hot knife through butter. Troseus did not stop. He continued the swing, an upward, flawless arc. Molok's massive, grotesque body hung suspended in the air for a moment. Then, slowly, it split in two down the middle and collapsed. Black, tar-like blood splattered everywhere. Silence. Only the sound of fluids leaking from overturned tanks and Troseus's raspy breathing remained. Xcina stepped out from behind the metal crate where he had hidden. His face was pale, but his eyes were shining with a terrifying realization. "By the gods," he whispered. What are you?" Troseus threw the melting sword to the ground. He looked at his hands covered in blood and black tar, trembling not with fear, but with the aftershocks of godhood. "I am Troseus," he said. His voice was no longer a wheeze, but a rolling thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the laboratory. He walked toward the massive double doors, the only barrier left between him and the world that had forgotten him. With a groan of straining metal, he pushed them open. The light hit him like a physical blow. Blinding, scorching, glorious sunlight. Troseus raised a hand to shield his eyes, staggering momentarily under the weight of the brightness. The heat. It washed over his cold, chemical-soaked skin like a mother's touch, like a lover's kiss. It was the sensation of life. As his eyes adjusted, the wind caught his tattered rags, billowing them around his emaciated frame like a war banner. He stood on the precipice of a high cliff, the laboratory carved deep into the rock behind him. He took a deep breath, the first taste of true air in 17 years. Xcina watched from the shadows of the doorway, trembling. He looked at the back of the man standing in the light. The silhouette framed against the blinding sun was no longer a broken prisoner, nor a failed experiment. The slouch was gone. The weakness was forgotten. There, bathed in the golden fire of the sun, stood a titan forged in darkness. Troseus lowered his hand and looked out at the horizon. his golden eyes burning brighter than the star above him.